Absolutely. Fancy technology.
Look at the extended forecast. I don't know. It's not looking good. No.
So we're gonna see her then, huh?
At least for the next, well, at least for the extended forecast. It is.
Yeah. That's weird, you know, because it's cold and the lakes aren't frozen yet, or.
Yeah, it won't take long though.
I know.
I guess right by this weekend.
It was just weird, you know, you look outside and you're like, looks green.
Yeah, if you were to just take a snapshot and guess what time of year it was,
Oh, yeah.
you would guess,
Well, even like
beginning of
Sunday.
December.
Sunday we got that slush,
Yeah.
and then that night it melted it all. And
Yeah.
like coming home, it felt like spring.
Yep. Yeah.
It's like, oh,
Yep. There's still a little humidity, you know.
yeah.
Or no, full of drying out left.
Panel of one. Yeah, I don't have any notes.
Panel 2.
Panel two.
Do you want us up there? We'll take 2 seats.
We got him and Andrew.
Okay. So he wants to hang out back here, so I'm gonna set him up on the.
Perfect.
I'll ask all the questions.
Just ask the random. Hey, can you handle that one?
Yeah.
Lost my Surface Pen.
You lost it?
I think I left it in the shirt pocket. I don't remember. I don't know where it is anymore.
I'm sure it'll come through the wash.
Pen probably is what's going to happen.
You can have a
Give it a minute, Charles.
They don't have them, that's fine.
You can't.
Yeah, I think
Oh, I asked Rhonda if she had one. She didn't have one. All right. I'll be.
I just take them for a week. Terribly bad. Making
They're
worse
already
cats.
basically feral. What? I just got to the episode of House. I know Wilson was in a porn. It's called Feral something. So he, like, House tells the entire hospital. Oh, that was so funny.
Andrew? Mm-hmm. Let's start here in a second.
Ellipse and.
No, I've already got a recording and everything.
Oh, do you? Oh, there you go.
So you don't
Is
have
that
to
what
do
you call it?
anything.
Ellipse?
Ellipse.
It's just
down
when we're all done.
on the ellipse.
After that,
It's a grammatical term.
of us.
Okay.
It's when you have 3 periods after.
Okay.
I can
Panelists,
pick
you
it
guys
up.
ready?
Yes.
Everyone else good to go? Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Paul Beasley. I'm on the project team over here at CyberAdvisors. I've got some SMEs, some subject matter experts to do a panel on Microsoft Server 2016 today. I am on the panel as well. I'll do my session last. Got it a little different for us. We usually do a single person talking about one subject, and then they sit down and someone else gets up. So we're going to do it. This panel's a little new for us. We're also testing out some recording capabilities that we haven't had before. Recorded to see if there's value in distributing that recording. During the panel, we're all going to have different subjects. If you want to be questions, go ahead and interrupt and ask questions. That's what this is going to be slightly different for us. And as they have questions that they may not be able to answer, they'll pass it to other people. I'm going to try to speak clearly. Myself and Jesse at the end there, we both have colds, so do the best I can. Introductions, like I said, I'm Paul Beasley, background in Microsoft servers, networking, different things. And Terrence, you want to start us off?
I'm Terrence Kolstad. I'm a lead solutions architect. I work a lot with sales to facilitate scoping calls and statements of work, but I also have a strong Microsoft background, mainly with Office 365 and cloud solutions, but also on-prem infrastructure.
I'm Michael Schultz. I'm a network project engineer. I specialize more in data center networking, data center infrastructure, so VMware, Hyper-V, System Center, VMM, and a lot of networking.
My name's Andrew Klemek. I specialize in Skype, Hyper-V, Server 2016. I have a very strong background in most Microsoft products.
And I'm Jesse Homa. I do networking with Mike, so I'll do a lot of Dell networking, Cisco networking, as well as Microsoft infrastructure, Hyper-V, VMware, kind of Office 365 with Terrence. So we do a lot of different technologies.
And security.
And security, general security.
I do have a freebie today. If you want to show up, we want to show our appreciation, so we're handing out this. So Katie over there has a list of names. We're going to give this out for free. It's on Server 2016 installation, installing and configuring. That's the first book of the series by William Stanek. If you know Stanek, he's pretty good. Some people are interested in that. If you don't want it, you don't take it, but it's a drawing at the end here.
Sorry, internal people don't get any
Tell people
shout
I'm not
outs.
eligible,
Sorry.
Tony.
Well, let's get started.
All right, so I was going to talk about Active Directory. The main point of what we want to talk about is what's new. Everybody knows what Active Directory is. Everybody uses it, so I'm not going to go into what Active Directory is, but some of the new main features relate to cloud. So when Server 2012 came out, they called it the Cloud OS because that was what Azure started building on. And with 2016, they show that that's exactly what they're thinking for the future. So the two main features that I want to talk about was PAM, which is Privileged Access Management, and Azure AD Join. So PAM is meant to be for organizations that want to audit their admin access. Typical scenarios are you have one admin, his account, his day-to-day account is an admin account, or you have two admins and they share an admin account. Both of those situations present different problems with auditing because you don't know who's doing what, or your day-to-day account is always privileged, which presents us problems. Anyways, so what PAM does is it gives you just-in-time access, as they call it. So you go to this web portal front end, you say, I need domain admin access for an hour, say go. It gives you that access, and then you perform your tasks, and then at 1 hour that access expires. Now what it does in the back end is actually you're creating a whole separate forest, a whole separate segregated Active Directory forest, and in there it's mapping the GUIDs of these security groups to the access that you need. So when you make that request, it's going to this other forest, grabbing the domain admin access, proxying that connection over, and adding it to your day-to-day account, giving you the rights you need, you perform the task, and then that expires. The point there is then I can say, you know, I see that Mike needed Exchange organization management rights to do whatever, and you can go back and audit and look at that stuff. So that's the first one. The second one is Azure AD Join. Does anybody have Windows 10 in their environment today? Okay, so what this does is you already have your domain join machine. There's some configuration, whether you're using directory synchronization or a full ADFS infrastructure. There's some configuration there. This is a subscription model because you do need Azure Active Directory Premium. But what this does is it takes that computer object and it ties it to your user account and it synchronizes that up into the cloud. And then from there, the functionality you'll gain is modern settings is the one I'm working with currently with a couple clients. So today in Windows 10, you have in the settings, you have the ability to synchronize your wireless passwords and your theme and different settings of your profile. And today, you needed this with a Live ID. But if you do Azure AD Join with Windows 10, you synchronize that into the cloud, and then it's my Active Directory account that gets used for that synchronization. And that's the whole point, is you want one identity to manage. You know, I don't want to manage my tcolstead@cyberadvisors.com internal and my Live ID, which are two identity providers. So the benefit of that is obvious. And then single sign-on with other SaaS applications. So it allows your single sign-on functionality that you would have with Office 365 today. It would just extend that to, you know, your Twitter account, your Facebook account, whatever accounts you're using with SaaS. All right. And then the other part I was going to talk about with Active Directory is federated services. So in 2012 R2, they took away the reliance on IIS. So they did that as a precursor to the 2016 platform. The two main features I wanted to talk about were multi-factor support. So this does require a subscription with Azure MFA. You can get that whether you're using Office 365 or if you have Azure Active Directory Premium. Both of those will include this. the setup is pretty simple in comparison to two-factor support previous, 2FA or MFA support. Just to call it out, MFA is multi-factor authentication, 2FA is two-factor authentication. They're used interchangeably because actually I don't know anybody that's using 3 factors of authentication for a single authentication setup. But so you would use MFA for to accommodate your typical username and password scenario. So you put in your username and password. I'd have this app on my phone. I say approve, and then that's my login. So it's something I know, which is my username and password, and something I have, which is my phone. The subscription is required for that. So just know that you would have your internal infrastructure for ADFS, and then this platform is something that would tie into there. And then the other part is access control policies. This actually builds on custom claims rules in 2012 R2. So in custom claims rules, you would have the ability to lock down specific public IP networks that could authenticate against ADFS, or only people in a certain Active Directory group, for instance. Creating that, it's kind of crazy XML language that you have to learn and set up and configure. Here it's more of a GUI interface. You say what you want. It's more of a wizard-driven interface. So it extends upon that, making it simpler for the admins to make changes. And then migrations are a lot easier. Previous, you had your 2008 R2 farm. You'd set up your 2012 R2 farm, and you'd migrate all your relying party trust from A to B. It made the migration a little more difficult. Now you're adding 2016 to your 2012 R2 farm, vacating out your 2012 R2 nodes, and that's the migration. So
We'll talk a little bit about that, the cluster stuff.
yep, and this happens a lot with different functions of Server 2016 with 2012 R2. They're making this functionality actually work in this stack.
So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the new security features that are in Server 2016. A lot of these are kind of brought over from Windows 10 Enterprise, since the kernel is essentially the same between the two operating systems, but a lot of these features are now being brought into Server 2016. The backbone of the security architecture is hosted on what we call virtual secure mode. It's effectively a separate running instance of the kernel where only secure running applications are allowed to run, and it's very constricted. Not a lot of changes are allowed to happen there, so you can verify that you actually have code integrity across your operating system, which stops a lot of attacks from malicious users or applications. So it leverages the existing virtualization extensions of the CPU. So if you're familiar with any kind of a hypervisor, you usually have to enable virtualization extensions within your BIOS settings so that you can actually run, a hypervisor. This just extends beyond those parts of the CPU. It's broken into 3 pieces, and these kind of get very detailed in, but they're the core components that are used in the features that I'll be talking about. There's a local security authority. This is basically how it handles your password management and secrets storage for credentials. You have kernel mode code integrity, which is basically the validity of the operating system and the kernel running and staying hardened. And then the hypervisor code integrity, which kind of is similar to kernel mode, but also validates the host. I won't touch on them deep because there's a lot of information in them, but they're basically the core aspects of how this secure technology works and is handed in the next set of features. Requirements for these are pretty standard: UEFI, running in native mode, 64-bit OS with CPU. One of the newer requirements is this SLAT, second layer address translation. It's another BIOS feature that needs to be enabled for this to operate, and then as well as TPM, virtual TPM. To give a kind of visual indicator on what this all means, because the security side of this is kind of more abstract, so I find that these kind of displays are a lot easier to understand. So more often than not, you'll be familiar with how hypervisors run through pictures like this, where you'll have your underlying hardware and the hypervisor running, and then you actually have on top of that the Windows operating system along with its kernel and its applications. What virtual secure mode does is it effectively separates into a separate bubble, so to say, where the secure code will be running. So you'll see the pieces I talked about are in this left virtual secure mode. There's the kernel mode integrity, the hypervisor integrity, and then as well as the LSA portion of it. But it's just kind of an easy way to get an understanding of what it means that it's actually separated. So there's no crosstalk, so apps can't directly talk into these protected modules. They actually have to go down the stack, over, and then verify. So that's kind of how that security happens. The first feature that I'll talk about is Device Guard. So Device Guard isn't really a single feature. It's composed of 3 core components. And basically what it does is it's a way for you to validate whether or not you have applications running in your environment that you are aware of and that you are guaranteed that are supposed to be running in your network. So if someone downloads like a malicious file or application, Device Guard would be able to say, hey, I don't identify that as a known whitelisted application. I'm not going to let that run in my environment. How that happens is you'll have configurable code integrity. So this is one of the major pieces. You essentially verify the signature of every application that runs. Now, some applications that don't have signatures or third-party vendors won't always sign their applications. You can actually go ahead and sign it yourself using one of their tools that Microsoft provides for you, signtool.exe. So you can actually get a recorded list of all of the applications you expect to run in your environment, and then make sure that your environment adheres to those rules. It's obviously a lot of overhead for setting up, but once you kind of have your whitelisted set of applications, it's a very secure standpoint to be in because your environment will only run the applications that you've specified are allowed to run. Second piece is of Device Guard is VSM, Protected Code Integrity. Basically what this means is it moves your hypervisor code integrity and your kernel mode code integrity into that virtual space, that virtual secured space on the left side. Just another way to kind of harden against attacks. So if anything wants to try to manipulate how your kernel runs or data that's used against your kernel, it will verify no, only certain responses are allowed because that's how this program is set to go. So it's basically just validates the integrity that your kernel is never changed or manipulated. And then the last part, platform and UEFI secure boot. This is essentially similar to what I was talking about. When a machine boots up, it verifies that it's only booting from registered known code that is not changed. So if you have attacks against your machines that would compromise the pre-boot functions of a machine, this validates that nothing pre-boot has been changed, so that you don't have to worry about something manipulating the boot code, which was a very popular attack in the last 5-10 years or so. This originally started in Windows 8, but the feature's kind of been expanded upon in Windows 10 and Server 2016, so it was kind of a notable area for Device Guard. And then the more well-known part of security, or I think the one that gives us the most benefit, is going to be Credential Guard. So Credential Guard, if you're familiar with how Microsoft stores its secrets, it stores all secrets that are used for how the operating system handles key management and secrets is in the LSA, or the local security appliance. So what it does is, so nowadays if you have a malicious application, it can actually read your process memory that your LSA is running. It's just a standard process that runs on your machine, and it holds all the secrets within its memory. And that can be easily attacked. So you have attacks like pass the hash or pass the ticket. You usually would hear those kind of terms for this. Applications can actually go into the memory, find out your secrets, and then use that to gain access to the rest of the machines in your environment. What Credential Guard does is it actually takes your LSA and it moves it into that left bubble. So it's now called the isolated LSA. So now what effectively happens is when applications or any kind of access is requested against your LSA, it says, hold on, I'm going to send that request to my isolated LSA, and it's going to handle that from a secure standpoint. And it will only accept known types of authentication requests. So that's how it guards against anything malicious getting in and breaking that memory and revealing system secrets so that people can, crack your passwords, so to say. So this is kind of the biggest piece for security that most people would really want out of 2016, just because it secures like domain admin credentials from being grabbed, or even tickets from being grabbed, so that they can then traverse your network. So I think this is one of the more larger easier to use features in 2016 as far as securities.
And that's one thing with the Credential Guard, that only protects against domain credentials, right?
Yeah.
So if you have somebody saving passwords for a website, that's still in Credential Manager in the LSA, still crackable via old methods.
Yeah, and this, one of the big things a lot of people wondered about this was, is there any backwards compatibility issues? And this works entirely with old applications, new applications. It's not rewriting how the LSA handles storing secrets. It merely turns the system into a proxy. So if anything needs to talk to your local LSA, if it's an older application, Server 2016 will receive the request and then send it over to that isolated environment. So there's really no manipulation you need to do from new applications or even older applications to work with 2016.
So Windows had a room full of booze, and they didn't even get to it. They didn't get to the room booze, and they finally, in Windows 10 and Server 2016, they finally have a guy checking ID. It's ridiculous why it took so long. If you watched our TechFuse and our golf event that we did earlier this year, we did a Windows 10 presentation. We covered this. These features are part in Windows 10. It's the same kernel. And Windows 10 Enterprise has this feature, and we actually demonstrated common hack tools that are used to pull down the domain admin passwords. Made the local cache of admin passwords on the main passwords on our phones. And that's scary stuff. So this prevents that from happening.
And then this is just another diagram to kind of show you what this means. So rather than, so you have your normal LSA on the left side, how it operates, that still stays in here, but now you have your LSA isolated on the right side. So any requests that normally would come in for storing secrets are now pushed off to that secured, isolated side of the operating system.
All right. I'm going to switch spots with Terrence here, because then I can point at the TV.
We're going too fast. We're going to speed.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, it's open forum for the most part. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about storage spaces in 2016, what's changed, and a little bit of a reminder as to what storage spaces is, if you don't already know. In storage spaces in 2016, it contains storage pools. Storage pools are a bunch of disks, local disks on a server. It's designed to give you storage resiliency. You can do mirroring, and now erasure coding, and then you can also now do storage tiering. And what's new in 2016 is really shared nothing storage, which is we call it Storage Spaces Direct, is what it's really licensed as and what they call it. But shared nothing storage has kind of been a word that Microsoft has toted around for a while. Thanks. So what do you use storage spaces for? Use it backup servers, file servers, and hyperconverged solutions. So in backup servers, you can go next. The object of the backup server is just to contain the most amount of disks you can, and that's what storage spaces can do. So here's an example of a server that contains 90 disks, and all of that can be presented on one volume using storage spaces with resiliency, even auto tiering. So you're making use of SSDs and spinning disks and presenting one big pool of data to whatever you want to do. In this case, if it's a backup server, a very large backup server like Veeam or whatever your storage or whatever your backup product is. Next. So like I said, it can make use of hybrid storage. You can have SSDs in that mix, which will increase the speed because all of your writes go right to SSDs instead of having to go to spinning disks. It'll auto-tier that data when it gets cold and move it from SSDs to spinning disks. It'll make that process a lot faster for you. So if you have archived data, it'll sit on spinning disks instead of your fast SSDs. This is a new feature in 2016. If you're making use of REFS volumes, you can, it'll auto-tier data from mirrored disks to parity tier disks. Now, mirrored disks are a set of disks that are just copies of data. So the data is written in double the amount of space it would normally take. Parity is similar to a RAID 5, where it's parroting data against a bunch of disks. Now, that parity is a lot slower, but it's a lot more efficient in space because you're not using double the amount of space. So what in 2016 does is that write that goes right to your disk is sent to the fastest spot it can go, which is in mirroring, and then auto-tiered at a later date using, there's a scheduled task that's set inside of the task scheduler, and is moved on a, if it's cold data, to a parity tier.
Mike, this is stuff that SANs do right now.
Yeah, so like, this is similar to what Compellent would do today with snapshots. So
There's no conflict with the SAN doing it if the OS is also trying to do it, is there?
well, you would generally use this on a environment that doesn't have a SAN. Like I said, a server with 90 disks or several servers with multiple disks.
You don't even have this enabled, or?
You wouldn't have SAN enabled on this case. No, you wouldn't do this on the SAN. SAN would be doing this behind the scenes.
It's almost, it is SANs, a form of storage.
Yes, it is. Yeah, you can use this with an REFS volume. I mean, again, you could do this actually with a Hyper-V server. It doesn't have to be a backup server.
Well, and the one thing with REFS, so that's the new file system format, NTFS, REFS, you can't convert an NTFS volume to an REFS, so it is destructive. Well, you can convert it, but in that conversion, you're destroying all the data. So just keep that in mind if you're looking into REFS.
So there really is no conversion then?
No.
That's the wrong word. That's
Right. Microsoft's standpoint is this is going to be the new file structure. Like moving forward, this is how you're going to want to start.
So you're copying your data, you're rebuilding your.
Rebuilding
Yeah,
your
getting it
blocks.
off, blowing it away, recreating. Yeah.
Basically, the stance with REFS in that sense is you use REFS if you can. There's certain cases you can't use REFS yet today, boot volumes, or if you want data deduplication. Those are two things you cannot use REFS yet today.
So would you say leave the system disk NTFS, build your D,
Yes.
EFG, REFS?
Is REFS.
Yes.
Unless that was going to be a data dedupe volume.
Yes.
So if you're using the Windows Server feature data deduplication today, you can't use REFS today.
Well, I thought it was going to be a new machine. Or
Yeah.
Right.
hardware sitting there and just copy everything
Yep.
over.
Yes.
That's how you'd migrate to REFS.
All right. So, go back.
Get too excited.
Another feature that we're using in, well, we're going into, the next feature we want to talk about is file servers. So file servers, again, you make use of the auto tiering. You have cold data that's sitting idle, make sure it's on the spinning disks. You know, people accessing fast data or data often, that's on the SSDs. So the same goes for file servers as backup servers in that regard. The next thing that's pretty cool is clustered file servers. So this is kind of using Microsoft or using Server to build your own SAN. And with a cluster, you can have redundancy with data on both sides. It still requires a shared storage or a shared infrastructure like a SaaS backend. At least it did in Server 2016. Now we introduced a new feature of storage replica. And that allows you to build a base server cluster, and or a file server cluster that's highly available. You can do asynchronous or synchronous replication between two servers, and it's basically a SAN at that point. You can serve up just CIFS if you wanted to. You can serve up SMB3 to Hyper-V servers, even iSCSI targets. Anything that Windows can serve up.
It gives you the ability to scale out.
Yes.
That is exactly what it stands for.
And one thing I missed from our earlier discussion is you look in front of you, the mugs and stuff. Help me say the name right, Marco. Comprex?
Comprex, yep.
Comprex. Our friends at Comprex are here to talk about licensing at the end of our session, because one of the problems we have is these all sound great. What does it apply to? What is licensing? The licensing model has changed, and that's why we want experts to talk about it. So we always try to bring the SMEs in for this thing.
Yep.
So next one.
Thanks.
Next one.
Yep. Our next feature we talk about for storage spaces is hyperconvergence. So this is new in 2016, where I can run a Hyper-V host along with being my scale-up file server essentially. It requires a minimum of 2 nodes at this time, which makes sense because I would need to have some form of redundancy. Recommended is 4 nodes, but it allows me to take all of my disks and all of my 4 nodes. Again, they do need to be all the same nodes, same hardware. The hardware right now is actually quite important to make sure you're all the same. But it allows me to pool all of that data and run in an REFS volume or an NTFS volume and spin virtual machines up off of it. That data can be auto-tiered, and it's, actually this is, something's wrong with the slide. I screwed up the slide.
So is storage replica 2 volumes that are shared among the hosts, or it's 1 volume shared between the 2 cluster nodes?
One volume shared between 2 clustered nodes, or 2 nodes.
So it's really not a replica of anything because it's only 1 copy.
It's a replica, it's synchronous copy, so if one node goes down, the other node's there to take over. You can do it actually asynchronous or synchronous.
So each node has its own storage volume
Yes.
behind it?
Yes.
Okay.
Each node, it doesn't require shared storage to make it work. That's what's new in storage replica.
And Microsoft told us in 2012 R2 that they do a shared nothing. We've never been able to make it function. We're a sharp bunch of guys, and we never could make it. It was all lies, I think. It just wasn't, it was half-baked.
Not Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean,
So if you're running an application and it's off of that shared, off that node, and that node goes down, you're gonna lose a connection.
It presents it presents a single namespace for you to connect to, and that single namespace is shared between those 2, but it's only one that's active. Now, if you're doing synchronous, a synchronous copy, it's going to be a little slower because the back end, it needs to write to the other side before it acknowledges those writes. You can do asynchronous, which would offer you the same speed, but then you have an RPO. So it kind of goes down to what you can design. The asynchronous should be pretty popular because it doesn't have bandwidth requirements or latency requirements. It can copy the data as it needs to.
So to be clear, the storage is presented as one entity, and
But
it doesn't care where it's active. Yeah, it's only active on one. The one's a replica, right?
Yeah.
Is it Andrew's turn?
Yes.
My turn.
That's a good feature, right? So Hyper-V, really, that's what we're all here for, right? Nested virtualization, that's one of the main kind of big things that Microsoft really touted and promoted at Ignite, and pretty much all since they wanted to start, rolling out Server 2016 and the new features. Essentially what it does, it gives you the ability to take physical hardware and where you're adding the Hyper-V layer to it so you can have VMs. It now gives you the ability to bring up an actual virtual Hyper-V host, which you can spin up clusters inside of that. The main benefit is for developers and internal IT staff that want to test out specific solutions that they don't have the hardware for, or they can't afford a type of a dev environment to actually test their solution, or to even become, familiar with, storage replica or Hyper-V clustering, hyper-converged.
Which allows us to build a cluster instead of a cluster, especially for shops that have SQL dev environments. This is very handy, which never existed before.
And this is out of the box. Server 2016 can do this. Same with Windows 10. You can run a Hyper-V host right on Windows 10 running VMs.
So do you make clones of the hosts, or clones of your physical environment, or clones of your production environment? Or do you have to build those from ground up to match?
If you have Server 2016 physical ones, technically you could clone them and bring them in. But the way that we're seeing it today is you're just building 2 new 2016 hosts, enabling the Hyper-V role, and then from those 2 virtual Hyper-V hosts, you can spin up all the VMs you want inside of there and cluster them together or do whatever you're looking for. The next big thing, this was in Server 2012, after some recent updates earlier this year, it kind of gave this functionality, but not a lot of people are aware of it, where it's located, or really what it does, but Microsoft's expanded on it. It's storage QoS. And what it does, it gives you the ability to actually set minimum and maximum values for your for the IOPS on your VMs. The main thing that's beneficial here is sprawl, where if you have a SQL server running on the same host as what your Exchange server is,
And you don't know when the busy time happens, but people start saying, oh, things are slow on my file server or whatever, a different application server. And it's because SQL's parsing through a ton of reports or jobs, and it's maxing out all the I/O that it can have, which if you've got more than enough I/O on your backend SAND or your whatever your storage application is, but to help that sprawl, you can actually set restrictions now from a VM level. So this is just a little image of actually exactly what it looks like in the VM as far as the virtual disk goes. You can actually run perfmon against it and change these values live when you're running data, and you'll see it stream up and down. So as soon as you click apply, those maximum values are automatically adjusted.
You said this was a per VM setting?
It is a per VM setting. So you can set this on every individual VM. You don't have to set it on all VMs if you don't want, but it gives you the flexibility that you didn't have in the past as far as deciding, you know, what VMs you want to have the IOPS that are needed to prevent scrolling.
There we go.
So security, Jesse touched on a bunch of security items already. Some of the things within Hyper-V that are also really cool and fundamental as far as like cloud-based hosting for virtual machines go is actually what they did to help protect your company's VMs from another company's VMs, so there's no inter communications between them, or essentially reaching across from one VM to steal your information or steal someone else's information. Or admins from actually looking into the VM and, you know, stealing company information. Because you don't, if you're hosting information, that's a risk that your company takes. If some of these items aren't enabled, where technically they could, a smart enough hacker could reach across into someone else's VMs if they knew how to manipulate everything. So this is what Microsoft's kind of built their Azure stack on to help prevent all that, all those types of attacks. Essentially shielded VMs to basically only allow specific hosts to run those VMs. What that is if Dan downloads my VMs today and brings them home and imports them into his Hyper-V server, tries to turn them on, they're not going to turn on. They're encrypted. He can't see the data. He can't start them. It's just going to do nothing. It's not going to give him any option. Even if he's got that VHDX file, he's got no way to actually access the data. The hardware trusted and admin trusted attestation modes do very similar things. It provides you the ability to actually designate the hardware that it's allowed to run on, or the management operators. So from a admin trusted attestation level, I can say Terrence has access to his 3 VMs, Jesse has access to his 3 VMs, and Mike, I'm not going to give him access to either of theirs. And no matter what he does, even if he's a domain admin within our organization, he can't look at them, he can't turn them off, he can't turn them on, he can't move them, because we just didn't give him rights. So it's a protection from there, even against someone that looks like they would have privileged access to this, but truly does not. It keeps everything separated. And then the host resource protection. What Microsoft did here was it gave admins the ability to actually say, if there's an issue, a noticeable issue, if a VM starts trying to chew up as much memory as it can, or CPU threads, processes, it'll automatically detect that and throttle that VM down. So rather than if you get a virus infection on one VM and it tries to consume all the resources available on that host to basically stop everything else from working, the host now can sense that if you have it enabled and just throttle that VM down so it doesn't affect anything else. So the resilient file system, Mike talked about that as well. Some of the other benefits related to Hyper-V, it gives you now the ability to instantly provision thick or fixed disks. Before on NTFS, if you wanted to thick provision a 2 terabyte VHD, it's going to take you an hour, 2 hours, depending on how fast your SAN storage is. Now it just instantly does it on REFS. You know, there's no waiting time. It's done as fast as soon as you click OK. It also provides the option to add hot add disks when the VMs are running. You don't have to shut it down to modify, to expand, shrink the VHDX files, or to even add a second one. You can do it on the fly. Microsoft's whole standpoint was, protection, uptime. They want the admin to be as, indiscreet as possible, where Paul's not going to notice his VM going down for maintenance, or is going to make the little things that you really had to adjust, memory and CPU, and adding additional resources, go unnoticed as much as possible. So this is one of the things that they added as far as the storage layer goes. And then also improved SMB connectivity between the hosts. Essentially what that means is they took all the errors that a lot of admins had mentioned in the past that happened with networking, their SAN disconnects with the storage, and just made a more lenient gap towards any transient issues, flapping, throb, jitter, latency, whatever it is, where it doesn't really affect the VMs or the hosts as much anymore. So it makes it a lot less noticeable.
It all covers that.
And Hyper-V Replica, a lot of people have heard about Hyper-V Replica. We're seeing more and more people use it, whether it's in a production environment or a test environment, but it's a very nice free way to actually give you an option as far as failover, flexibility, even a type of redundancy for your existing VMs. You can take whether it's a cluster or a single node and actually replica to similar hardware. It doesn't have to be exact hardware, just if you have an old 620, 610, something laying around, you can actually point that as a replica. And it can use SAN storage, local storage, whatever you want, and replica those production VMs or test VMs over here. And they sit in an offline state, choose how fast you actually want the replicas to happen. So you can say, I want 10 replicas every 15 minutes. You can do that, 4 replicas an hour. And so it'll replicate all the changes over. One of the nice things about this that we've been doing frequently for clients is they have 2 sites, and you can actually just replica the production VMs over to the secondary site. The change data is typically pretty small. And if their primary site goes down, you can actually just tell it to fail over, and the VMs will start running over on that other host. You can test failover, and you can fail back as well, replicate changes in the opposite direction. So it gives you a lot of flexibility and functionality as far as that goes. Or if you're interested in actually just an easy way to actually have a redundant solution or a backup solution in some sense. And one of the other nice things, a lot of clients tend to use RDS terminal servers within their environments, and they made a lot of improvements as far as that goes with the remote FX capabilities. One of the new things that they added both in Server 2016, but also in Windows 10, is the physical GPU section, where you can now designate any physical graphics card and direct that into new VMs. Now the caveat with that, it has to be a Server 2016 or a Windows 10 VM, but you can have that card go directly into that VM now, which gives you a lot more flexibility. If you have applications that require GPU access, some applications, SolidWorks, that uses a lot of graphics, GPU.
We have a client that uses RDS, and RDS works fine most of the time, but when they try to do video training, it starts tanking. So this helps address that.
And you can actually see how many VMs you have this added to, how much it's using. So it gives you some nice metrics as far as. They improved just the amount of dedicated RAM that it can have to VMs, added 4K support now for, I guess, anyone that wants to have a 4K or all 4K RDS environment. Got really nice monitors.
My turn. Clustering. Clustering is an old and favorite topic of mine. I've done some clusters over the years. This is new stuff in Server 2016. First key feature that I have in here is the rolling upgrade option. Really what it does is allows a admin to upgrade a server cluster running Server 2012 R2 into Server 2016. Fairly straightforward, without stopping workloads. Without creating downtime, very effective. No longer need to create a new cluster or generate a downtime. That was our problem before. If you had a 2012 cluster going to 2012 R2, you had to build a whole new cluster, offline migrate all the VMs to it. It was a big pain in the butt. Now, we have a much more streamlined process. The whole process is very cumbersome, yes. New process requires SLAT. I don't know why I put that in there, but SLAT is a new requirement for Server 2016, so we have to keep pointing that home and make sure that people buy servers that have SLAT.
Is that a pretty common feature with all new CPUs?
All new hardware has SLAT, so I don't. It just if this comes up with older hardware, we might run into a problem. So make sure that we don't.
Mike was just saying that the 11th generation of Dell, so I mean 710s have it.
Yeah, that we're.
So anything newer.
Try to enable us on a really old, really old server. Might have virtualization problems, anyways. Clustering with Windows 2010, 2012 R2, and 2016 nodes. When you have them together, it's called mixed OS. And once everything is migrated, the version of the cluster becomes Windows Server 2016 cluster functional mode. If you're familiar with Active Directory functional modes, this is functional level. This is very similar.
Same thing for Hyper-V clustering.
Some notes, it's going to only be used if you have a cluster that's 2012 R2. That's very important. It won't work with 2012, 2008 R2, 2008. And you need to update Microsoft. These are Microsoft recommendations. Update all your nodes, all your 2012 R2 nodes first. Make sure they're all in the same patch level. Hurry up and upgrade. Microsoft's recommendation is that if you do this rolling upgrade, they do it in 4 weeks because they say there's some limitations because 2016 has more cluster features and 2012 R2 has less. You're going to be missing out on some features if you don't do the full upgrade. You don't get to the finish line within a short period of time. So it's not a do this over a year necessarily. They'll recommend you do it within a month or so. Good news is if you've got an N+1, N+2 scenario where you've got enough physical nodes to house enough of your VMs, you can kind of push once your VM's over so you've got some nodes free, 2, 3 nodes. I mean, I can think of one client that might have those resources, but you can do multiple nodes simultaneously, so you can really roll through this pretty quickly. This can all be done with PowerShell. I shouldn't have to mention that, but it can all be scripted. Do not attempt to use an in-place upgrade on the 2012 R2. It'll let you do it, but it's not recommended and it won't work right. Hybrid replicas will remain intact in the process. If you saw that or not, you probably did. And VMM and Virtual Machine Manager and System Center 2016 can automate this process. And there's a little process that Microsoft gives us to follow. So really, start here, start at the top. You first back up your cluster database. You back your workload data, which is going to be your SQL server, your whatever, your clustering, your file cluster, whatever it is. You back up that data. You check if cluster automatic updating is applying updates to cluster. You got to stop that because you don't want VMs to pop up, shut down and try to do an offline update. You want to make sure that that's disabled. And then for each 2012 R2 node in the cluster, you're pausing it, you're draining the roles, you're evicting it, and you're doing a clean OS install. You're reformatting the drive. You're doing a clean install of Windows Server 2016. You're adding your failover cluster features. You're configuring network and storage, just like you usually do with 2012 R2. Nothing much different here. You add your node to the cluster from a Server 2016 node, and you reinstall the cluster role, and you install your cluster workload like your SQL or your scale-up file cluster, whatever you might have on that cluster node. And now you can have your failover. You can have VMs up to it. And when you do all your 2012 R2 nodes, and you're all done with them, then you can update your cluster functional level to Windows Server 2016. From that point, you can't add 2012 R2 nodes back to the system. You're done. But to that point, So that cluster functional levels change, you still can't.
And until you upgrade the cluster functional mode to 2016, you don't have the availability for the hot add features, the hot add disk, RAM, CPU, NICs.
Okay. Thanks. Another cool feature, Cloud Witness. Now, I've got a diagram, a little picture that shows why this is beneficial, but I'll just talk about it. What Cloud Witness does is it allows you to leverage Microsoft Azure and limits the need for a third separate data center. For those clients that maybe in this room, elsewhere, you might have 2 locations with clusters. You might have a third data center you can use as a witness to tell you what site is available. Great. You don't need this. But if you don't, and most people don't, most people I know have 2 sites. If you've got maybe a colo and a main location, this is really effective. What it does is use the publicly available Microsoft Azure blob storage, which reduces the maintenance overhead, it's pretty low cost, and it houses it in a place that can see all Azure, which is the cloud. You use the same Microsoft Azure storage count. You can use it for multiple clusters, 1 blob file per cluster, but it provides a very low ongoing cost of the storage count. Since it's just blob storage and it's very small changes, what are we thinking, Terrence, for Azure cost?
Just pennies.
Yeah,
pennies.
essentially they couldn't make it free is what the actual developers said. They couldn't get it free, so at the most it's going to cost us 12 cents a year. They're trying to make it free, but I guess there's some legal holdup that they literally cannot give. It has to be 12 cents a year right now is how much it.
So we think it's pretty effective, right? And a pretty effective way to have a witness. This is a big problem because this is a great scenario. We have a lot of clients that have 2 sites, a lot of them, and clusters of both sites. And in order for a system, you've got, right here, you've got 5 votes total. You need 3 votes to confirm that a site is available. So you need some third party, in this case, their site 3 is a data center, some other location that they own, a sister site, a daughter site, whatever it might be. This is fine. This is fine if you have that environment. But if you don't, this works as well. And it's pennies for the, I mean, it's 12 cents a year. I mean, it's, even if it was $12 a year, it's still pretty reasonable. Because it's writing so little data, that quorum is so small, that witness is so small that it doesn't really incur much data exchange, it doesn't cost much. So this is how it looks. The Cloud Witness works out of Azure, and it watches your 2 sites, and it can keep track of and provide that vote to know which site is up and down. And this is, you start incorporating this with Hyper-V Replica, start incorporating other solutions, you kind of build your own disaster recovery solution out of the box operating system. So the basic steps for getting that going, you got to create Azure storage count. That's shocking. Configure the Cloud Witness as a quorum witness for your cluster. If you're not familiar with, I got a screenshot of where that is. It's a little different in Server 2016. So this is the screenshot for if you're in the Azure portal, just basically creating a Cloud Witness. It's pretty basic. It's a fairly straightforward process. We have listed steps on how to do it. This is just a screenshot of where you're at. And on the server side, on the cluster side, where you'd normally create a disk witness, which is very common, used to be a LAN off a SAN, or a file share witness, which was obviously a file share off of some file share server as your witness. You have a configure a Cloud Witness. And when you do that, you're pointing to the URL that's on the Azure site. Another thing that's pretty cool, and there's a lot of things that were new and cool in clustering, but I only picked 7. Virtual machine resiliency. Now, Andrew, you might have talked about this a little bit earlier, about the transient errors. One of the things we run into a lot with clusters is that clusters run along, humming along, and all of a sudden there's some weird transient error, some weird, the cluster service freaks out for a second, and then all of a sudden the VMs all throw up, and it's all happens in a very small amount of time. It's really the way that the code, I'm guessing the coders wrote it, is that they just got too aggressive about any kind of issue. They weren't considering the real world scenarios of transient errors, but just a temporary problem with networking all of a sudden would freak out the whole cluster. That's not, I mean, it would create more downtime than was absolutely necessary. So issues like this, node disconnected, the cluster service attempts to connect all nodes, it doesn't see it for some reason because of network or something temporarily. Cluster service crashes, it's not going to say the service is not communicating with any other node. Asymmetric disconnect, that's trying to connect to all live nodes. Those are just 3 common ones. So previous versions aggressively handled transient errors, like I said, often causing more bad than good. I mean, they detect the issue and then they act on it too quickly. The problem would have been gone already if they had not done anything at all. So 3 new states have been introduced. Unmonitored, you can guess what that means. It's in an unmonitored state. It's been ignored temporarily. Isolated means the node is no longer in an active membership, but the node continues to host the VM role. And quarantine means that the node is no longer allowed to join the cluster for a fixed period of time, which in default is 2 hours. So the process for this intra-cluster resiliency is a little convoluted, but so after a transient intra-cluster failure has occurred, what's the most common one, do you think, Andrew? Is it a cluster service or is it networking? Can't see the nodes?
Usually the networking was,
okay, networking.
was the one that was.
It's not the network.
It's not the network. Let's say it's not the network. Let's say we had there's a temporary network glitch, something, the switch freaked out or something. It senses it, puts it into an isolated state, and removes it from active membership just to protect itself. VMs on this node are now considered unmonitored. It's going to go, I think something's wrong, but I'm just going to hold for a second. Just not worry about it for a moment. Blocked anything that's in the VMs. If the VMs are using block storage, which would be Fiber Channel, which would be iSCSI. What am I missing for block storage?
NFS?
NFS.
No, that's not block storage. What I'm talking about.
That's all that matters. Fiber Channel and iSCSI. If those are those VMs have block storage, the VM will be placed in a pause critical
SAS
because it can't see that storage. It believes it can't see that storage. But if you have VMs that are using SMB storage, they continue to run an online state. So if it's isolated, now it's isolated. VM's isolated. The node is isolated. It continues experiencing issues, which means it sees an issue every 4 minutes, which means it's maybe not transient. Maybe this is something. This is a bigger deal. If the VMs are failed over to another node, it says, "Hey, let's move these over to the node." It's not calling us to tell us to do this. It does it for us. And it marks that node as down. This is why N+1 strategies are very important too, because if you don't have another node that has resources for this, it's not going to be able to function. So if a node is isolated a certain number of times, so the isolated node had this problem a number of times, if it happens 3 times within an hour, it's placed into a quarantine state for a default of 2 hours, and all VMs in the node are drained and suitable for a suitable node in the cluster. So to the 2 different, it experiences issues within 4 minutes. They get failed over. If it happens multiple times, 3 times within an hour, it's placed into a quarantine state.
Do you know, are these thresholds modifiable?
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
Microsoft says no more than 25% of nodes can be quarantined at any given time. It freaks out when that happens. It won't keep quarantine won't quarantine your whole environment. That means you got some serious problems.
Yeah.
Another feature, and I'm going through this a little quickly. If you guys have questions, stop my babbling. Some diagnostic improvements, just some quick things in here in failover clustering. I don't deal with this as much as our friend Andrew over here does, but they got some diagnostic logs running a server that allow in-depth troubleshooting of problems. That's not new. That's been there for some time. There's a cluster.log, if you're not familiar with it. It's generated with git cluster log. But now some new things, time zone information. Now the top of the log on server 2016 has the UTC offset of the server. Note in the top of the log saying, hey, UTC value is -6 or whatever. So if you're looking at the logs, you know what the real time would have been. That was kind of puzzling. You had to kind of figure that out by running some PowerShell commands first. Now they just tag the top of the log. You can run other Git cluster logs to get the log format in non-UTC and local time. You can do that too, but now it's at least alerted in the top of the log what it is, what time zone. Cluster objects have also been added. They did it this way now. If you look at the cluster log, there's headers, which I have been told they picked this format because they thought it looked like TIE fighters, because that's Microsoft for you. So there's headers, there's a bunch of them, network resources, there's a bunch of them, and then outside, underneath it, they've got the additional items in a CSV format. So now when you look at the log, it's not all just jumbled together, it's got individual headers.
The logs have gotten easier to read too. 2012, they just basically left developer errors on when they published 2012 R2. And so people are, well, what is all this? I'm getting this error or whatever, and you would look at it for 2-3 days and you can't figure out what's generating it, why it's being generated, or even what's wrong, if something's wrong. They admitted that, we just left the developer errors on because we thought it would be useful. They got rid of that in 2016 because they realized they were getting a lot of unnecessary complaints from a lot of customers.
They have a new verbose log as well, which if you look in here, there's diagnostic verbose. It puts it to level 5. It also cycles back, but it puts a lot of data in the log for additional information. Workgroup and multi-domain clusters. This comes up every once in a while. I still don't know why, because most people I talk to have Active Directory, but not everybody does. Right? It's not everybody. So the issue of having workgroup and multi-domain clusters, having clusters from a different domain, or having all workgroups, we still see it. So Microsoft addressed it with Server 2016. So really, as you probably know, in previous version of Windows, a cluster can only be created between nodes joining the same domain. That was the basic rule. So you can create failover clusters using the following configurations. You can still do single domain clusters with all nodes joined to the same domain. That's still doable, of course. But you can also do multi-domain clusters with nodes that are members of different domains. And I don't have a scenario right now where that's needed, but I might have that if I have two companies that may be merging or an acquisition occurs. That might be a way to get them in the same cluster now without changing, a mass change of a domain or something. So the scenario I think I can see coming in some fashion.
Yeah, maybe like the scenario where there's authentication forests, a resource forest, old school, people separating those out.
There's limitations in this as well, which I'll go through in just a second. But and the third option is workgroup clusters, which are member servers, workgroup not domain joined. So prerequisites of single domain clusters Windows servers have changed from previous versions, the same rules, 2012 R2 and 2012. But for multi-domain and workgroup clusters in Server 2016, there are some rules. You got to have a local account created and stored, the same local account created and stored in every administrator's group on each node. Failover cluster needs to be built as an Active Directory detached cluster, which is the part of the wizard process, with a cluster network name of type DNS, so it can find it. It's going to use DNS more than it did before to find things. They need some way to find these objects, and DNS is the trick. Each cluster node needs to have its primary DNS suffix, which we usually do as a best practice, but you have to do it in this situation. And for multi-domain clusters, the DNS suffix of all domains in the cluster needs to be present in all cluster nodes. I actually have a screenshot of that, I think. Yeah. So really what it is you've got, there's a screenshot here, doing a net local group administrators, and you've got members, you've got a local admin user. This would have to be reflected in every node that you're trying to do this on. Your machine names, you got a computer name. It's obviously part of a work group called test, but you've got a full computer name with a full DNS suffix. And in environments that have multiple domains, you got under the append these DNS suffixes. If you see, there's a Microsoft screenshot. You've got a bunch of suffixes in there. Say that 10 times fast. Suffixes in there that allow you to be able to talk to each one of the domains. Some caveats. There's more caveats than benefits in some regards, in my opinion. SQL Server, for example, now these are workloads on top of cluster services. SQL being one of our most important one, it's supported, but you got to use SQL authentication, which actually contradicts our best practice of Windows authentication. You can't use Windows authentication because you need Active Directory, so it makes sense. File server supported, but not recommended due to lack of Kerberos, because Kerberos authentication is the best practice. So which is preferred for SMB, so that's a bit of a problem. Hyper-V supported, but not recommended as live migration. It can't be used. Only quick migration. And message queuing, which we only ever see in SQL environments, is not supported because it puts its properties in Active Directory.
So it's basically like saying, you can do this,
but
you don't want to do this.
We will not have these designs in most configurations. It'll be our normal single domain design, but Microsoft is trying to help us out by creating solutions that meet specific needs. Witness type is recommended for workgroup and multi-domain clusters as a cloud witness or disk witness, not a file share witness, because you need SMB. The other feature, virtual machine load balancing, and I promise I won't talk for too much longer here. Kind of cool. This is something that we saw back in 2008 R2 with the advent of 2008 R2 VMM and SCOM. So if you had a cluster you had SCOM, and you had System Center Operation Manager, and you had Virtual Machine Manager. You could do this back then. But now it's in the operating system. So what it does, it allows seamless load balancing of virtual machines across all nodes in the cluster. So overcommitted nodes are identified by virtual machine memory and CPU utilization on the node. And tax VMs are automatically live migrated to nodes with available resources if possible, if there are nodes available for that is.
So this is VMware DRS.
Sure.
It's dynamic optimization.
Which used to require VMM in order to do that.
Right.
So now it's built into the OS.
They took a cool feature that VMM provided, cool feature that VMware has, and they included it part of the operating system. So really the goal of a discussion like this for you gentlemen is that people are probably going to buy Server 2016 eventually. It's going to happen. You're going to have a new server. We want to make sure you understand the full value of it. So when you write that check for the Microsoft, you feel like you're getting a good bang for your buck. People that complain about Microsoft products the most are most likely, from my perspective, people that know them the least. They don't really embrace the features that are already in there. It's turned on by default in Windows Server 2016 and can be tuned to be very aggressive. From what I looked at, the basic settings, the default settings are moderate. They're not super aggressive. Like, oh my goodness, you've got 20% of utilization. I'll move you over. It's not that aggressive, but you can make it aggressive. And as the gentleman here to my left were talking, load balancing is disabled when System Center Virtual Machine Manager is dynamic optimization is already in use. If it already has a load balancing optimization in play because of VMM, it's going to turn this off by default. And I think this is my last section here before we talk about licensing, but Virtual Machine Start Order. I thought this was pretty cool, so I want to make sure we included it. It's a new feature that introduces start order orchestration for VMs and all groups in a cluster. They kind of had that in 2012 R2 where you could kind of put the load order or whatever, but it was imperfect in my opinion. And it was imperfect because you couldn't necessarily group things together. You couldn't make sure that the group was independent. Those groups were considered dependencies.
You couldn't do if-then statements.
If-then statements.
Where if a DC was running, then start SQL, or then start Exchange. Now it provides you the functionality of doing that.
So what it allows you to do is it allows you to group your VMs into tiers, and start order dependencies can be created between the tiers. You can probably imagine where this is most effective. And we had this problem when we had clusters that had a domain controller, and then we had SQL that used Windows Authentication and Exchange, and we go, oh no, we got to make sure that the DC comes up first, and fully comes up first before the other ones. You can now do that. You can see these are my critical tier. They need to come up first. Do not start the second group until those are ready and up and running. And that is good news bears. VMs and domain controllers can be configured to start first, and the other VMs, like I said, are not started until the dependency has been started. And that's what was lacking from the previous versions. They were on the right track, but they weren't there yet.
So with this one, do they test services? Make sure validate services has started.
Microsoft. I haven't seen it directly because I haven't tested it this way. But what I understand is that Microsoft's waiting for the machine to be considered fully booted.
Okay.
You can script it out where you can test services and everything with it.
So I can do dump WMI.
I think right now it waits for integration services to kick in.
That will be the final load for it. And that is all I have. Any questions about this before we have some licensing discussion? Because I want to make sure that we do talk about server licensing and all that good stuff. Anything question for the panel here or myself?
We relate, did you talk about footprint, size of what a base installed 2016 is versus 2012?
No, and one of the things we didn't go into was Nano. I haven't seen many customers even ask for that, but like the Nano installs with 300 megs, 200 megs, it's ridiculously small.
Depends on your drivers. That's about
and then the other part is you can integrate different features, like the DNS servers is a feature you can bring in, but not all Windows Server features are there, and they're hesitant to add them all in because the more options they give you, the bigger that package that gets. That's what they don't want. They want a very light something that doesn't need to be updated frequently. I mean, I think
they don't want any .NET really in there at all.
No .NET at all. So because that's a big part of what's in the operating system. So actually, they said it was 3 updates since it came out.
Yeah, and they just don't want anything in there that is large and requires a lot of updating. So most customers that'll use it are for Hyper-V hosts.
But I think their question more is versus Sewer 12R2, stopping around here, versus.
Well, just, you know,
Is it much bigger
after running
install?
2012 R2 for so long and with all the updates and patches, now we're up to, 100 gig C drives, just, to have all that space where downloads, updates and stuff. Have they streamlined any of that? Have they
It's
said it?
smaller, and they've showed as far as the updates go, the packages in general are smaller. They tried to give everybody a rough estimate of, okay, in 2.5 years, where's 2016 going to be as compared to 2012? And it was going to be about 40-some% of what Server 2012 R2 was from their estimation. Now, right now, I can tell you running some VMs, just going through the initial updates that have already been released, you don't see it growing that much. So the footprint stays pretty small as to when you start or when you do the base install, as long as you're not, if you start adding a whole bunch of features, then it starts to bloat, obviously, but it does look a lot smaller than what 2012 was.
Our first topic that you might have missed was Active Directory, some Active Directory changes, and Terrence covered that, and some of Azure, PAM, and some of the things.
Yep.
Okay. Questions about that? Anything else? I'm going to pass the con to you, good people. All right. I'm just as interested in hearing that.
Bring it with you.
It is.
One chair to another chair started going now.
Why don't you do the intro?
Yeah, there you go. Panel 2.
You can do the intro. It's I'll just introduce ourselves real quick. My name is Matt Badgerow. I work for Caparix. I actually am responsible for the partnership between Caparix and Cyber Advisors. We work with Cyber Advisors in a licensing capacity, since they don't really handle the larger Microsoft agreements, the enterprise, MPSA. A lot of the Azure agreements, we work with them as well. I'm based out of Chicago. I run the partnership. This is Marco. I'll let him introduce himself. He's the resource for everybody.
Yep, I'm the key account manager, so I really deal with Minnesota and then kind of the border of Wisconsin. I'm based out of Minneapolis, so a lot of the times I'm going with the Cyber Advisor guys and just going on site and talking with customers about licensing, kind of getting an idea of what they've got, areas of consolidation, maybe some overages, shortages, that sort of thing, just to make sure they're not overspending on their software. So Caparix, just to give you an idea of who we are, we're a global company. Is this going?
I want to do F5 to get full screen.
There we go. We're a global company, so this is our footprint here. We came into the U.S. at the beginning of 2015. We're the largest Microsoft partner actually outside of the U.S. and we were granted from Microsoft to become a licensing partner in 2015. We've grown from about 5 employees to start in 2015 to roughly about 130. So you kind of see we've got 34 countries, 80 sites, 2,300 employees roughly. These are just some of the customers that we work with on a global basis. We were the 2015 Volume Licensing Partner of the Year. And then another arm of our business is actually managing those assets from a software perspective. So we've got a proprietary tool that does that for you.
And a unique thing to point out is we are, in the U.S., strictly Microsoft. So the difference between us and other LSPs is we don't handle anybody else's licensing except for Microsoft. And we're actually, Marco and I and our team are aligned to the Microsoft team for that region. So it's we basically serve as an extension arm. Basically, if you want to put it bluntly, it's a sales force for Microsoft. Basically their third-party sales force. But once you click through, you want me to take the licensing?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'm going to keep it basic and brief on the licensing because we can dig this stuff till we hit bedrock and still probably not get the right answer. So what I'm going to look at is licensing for cores. The thing I really want to point out on this, because it's just saying how it's licensed, is you see I have a lot of clients that have seen the minimum of 8 core licenses per physical processor. They see it and say, I already have 1, so now I need to buy 7 more. It's like SQL all over again. That's not true. The minimum of 8 core licenses per physical processor, those 8 core licenses will now, let's say we're talking standard, will now cost as much as 1 license for the 2 procs of standards. So they haven't raised the price. They've just completely turned the licensing model around. So that's the first thing that I always bring up, because I remember when SQL moved to core, I was selling software at the time and had to make those phone calls. That was not a good time. It was awful. I hated making those phone calls. I didn't want to tell people they had to pay 4 times more for their SQL. It's not really the case in this one. They're keeping price parity, but they're going to do it for cores to be able to recognize that core revenue. The 16 cores, there's a chart here. The way I like to look at it is, do my best to play my best math teacher impression here, but it's a minimum of 16 cores, 2 cores per license. So let's say we'll look on the chart, make it easy. We have the 2 processor server, 8 cores per processor. So that's your 16 core, that's your minimum. And it looks like how many packs do we need to have? You take that 16 cores, divide it by 2, it's 8 cores, 1 license. I know it's clear as mud, but that's pretty much what they're looking at. And then if you're looking at, let's say you have 2 extra cores. So now we can go core packs. So they're not going to make you buy them. This was a big question I was getting with a lot of my clients in the Chicago area was, if we have 10 cores, or we have 20 cores. So do we have to buy 2 8-core license packs, or 8 core packs, or 2 core packs, whatever it is? But do we have to buy another 8? No, you don't have to. You can go per core after you hit that 16.
Oh, it's per core? I thought they were 2 core packs.
They're 2 core packs.
Okay.
But you don't have to buy the 8 pack of 2 cores
Right.
if you go over by 4 cores. You
So
don't,
really,
you don't have to overbuy.
It comes down to, if you have 2 sockets, 8 cores, just like you had in the old days, it's the same. Anything over that, so if you bought the Mac Daddy server that has 2 sockets, 10 cores each, you're just paying for those additional 2 core packs to meet that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's where you could see an increase in price. I mean, that's them picking up. It's the same thing as the SQL model. Oracle was making a ton of money off cores, so SQL came in. They said, why are we losing all this money on it? I personally didn't think it was handled very well, because I had to make those calls. But this one, I see what they're doing. It does make sense, at least to me. As far as there's a couple little things I want to point out. We didn't put them in slides because this is where it gets tricky. Is if there are any software assurance customers currently under software assurance, you can now upgrade to 2016. So if you have 2012 with software assurance, you could upgrade to 2016 on the old licensing model. So you don't have to worry about, now am I licensed for the right amount of cores? Doesn't matter. And once that software assurance runs its course, it reverts back to the 2012 licensing, of course, or the 2016 licensing. You would have to start counting cores after that. So if you renewed your software assurance, you'd renew it in core packs and then add on anything you'd have to add. Also, putting software assurance on this model will allow you to move your allowances into Azure. So if you're going to do any Windows servers in Azure, so you're starting a little infrastructure up, you're creating servers, instead of having to pay for those, you can use those license and software assurance, so the software assurance grants, to pay for the licensing, the Azure licensing. So I know that's it's another area that's a little bit gray, and that's where we come in. We actually do custom assessments for everybody free of charge, where if somebody wants to find out, okay, I have all this licensing, we have to move to this new model, how am I going to do it? We actually can come in and look at your licensing. We do it virtually, or come in, look at the licensing that you have, look at what you have installed, and then make recommendations. And difference, I guess, between I've worked at other LSPs and this one, we're automatically not going to say buy an EA. We're going to say this is the different options you have. Pick the one that makes sense. We'll pick the one that makes sense cost effectively and for the future. I mean, if somebody, most of the time when I look at software assurance, I look at something like this, where eventually the cloud migration is going to happen. You know, across the board, it's Microsoft's gently pushing people there, especially with licensing models like this. It's going to keep going that way. It's kind of nice to have that SA to be able, one, to roll in if they change the licensing program again, two, not having to rebuy software licenses in 6 years. But the other big portion of it now is being able to move that allotment to Azure. So if you do move anything into Azure and you're saying, well, now I have to pay for Windows servers, I have all these other physical servers now, or server licensing that I'm not using, it's not that case. If it has software assurance on it, you can use that to eschew the Windows server costs in Azure. Do you want to add anything on it?
I don't think so. I mean, that
Any
covers
points?
it. I would recommend, just if you're looking at this, you can bring us in, like you said, for an assessment. We can pull your Microsoft licensing statement for you so you can see everything you've got. And we can kind of pull it all together for you and just get a holistic view of what your environment looks like. Yeah.
I have clients that are not aware of what licensing that they have in place right now. We've got one client right now. Is that?
Yeah, so what we do is we just request, we just need an email requesting that we can pull their MLS statement, and then from what Microsoft has on hand, if there's a couple different company names associated with them, just let us know, and then we can pull all the licensing, and then it'll pull it all into an Excel spreadsheet for them. And then we can review it. We've got licensing specialists that will, from desktop to server, just kind of look at everything, answer any questions you have, make sure that you fully understand it as well.
Then my question is, who misses the old server Cal model? One server, one license. They've definitely made it a lot more complex these days. Oh, your virtualization allotments will still be there as well. They didn't take those away.
Yeah,
So-
they didn't change that, but I do have one change that they had, and in 2016 now, if you want to make use of that cool new storage spaces, direct storage, or what I can't-
Storage replica.
No, it's not.
I
Well,
thought
it is storage
that's one of
replica
them.
too. Storage replica
Yep.
and direct, S2D,
Yep.
storage spaces direct there.
Yep.
If you want to make use of those features, that requires data center.
Yeah.
That's something new. They couldn't fit that into standard anymore.
Have that up.
Yeah, so they had, in 2008 model, you had, standard and data center gave you additional features. And then in 2012, they said, you know what, we're just gonna level the playing field, standard gets you 2 VMs, data center gives you unlimited, but the feature set's the same. Now they went back and said, standard gets you standard, data center gives you unlimited VMs plus, like the rolling cluster upgrades, that's something that's data center. There's only like four main features that I saw. Those two,
S2D,
storage replica.
It's those ones right there in that table. So
There you
can
go.
see it. I'll send this out to everyone so they can have a look at this, but this.
Yeah, everything
this
we presented
details
we'll
it.
send out.
Yeah, the shielded VMs, that was the other one.
Yeah.
So we don't really run too many Windows OSs on physical servers. Everything is in a virtual machine. We
Mhm.
resell to customers. We have one CPU
Mhm.
assigned to
license
that.
that?
So you're gonna have to buy 16 cores.
As a,
So
that's
eight
base, no
I
matter
mean,
what.
2 core packs
physical,
regardless,
virtual,
yes.
That's what we should buy.
Every physical host will have 16 core pack.
that'll do too.
We license like physical or we license the
Physical.
virtual we
The
spend?
physical, right?
Because I'll spend multiple.
Well, but the thing
VMs.
I always forget the breakpoint. What was it, Andrew? We did the calculation. It was 11 VMs, 17. I thought it was under 20. Once you're over 20 VMs, it makes sense to do just data center.
But I run VMware for all my virtualization. I don't use Hyper-V. So.
Yeah, you still have to
look at
license the host.
physical.
No, you still have to license, you have to look at the physical cores.
Okay, that's,
Yeah,
so I
it's
gotta
still
look at
based off of physical hardware. Yes.
is what it's based on,
Yep.
not just.
Not the VM, not the virtual.
And again, if you're running a bunch of Linux VMs and then maybe 5 Windows, then stick with standard unless you need one of those data center features. Then you buy the data center, license that host, and then you're good for unlimited VMs.
If, let's say we have
I know that,
10
right?
hosts, do we license the 10 hosts and what's underneath is VM, we don't care? Or how do
If
we
you're
license?
data center.
Yeah, if you're doing data center.
If you're running data center, yes.
You just license 10 hosts with that,
16
with the
of
16 core packs, yeah. But basically, whatever 2012 was, if you look at the pricing, it bumped up by like $100. It was something really minimal.
$600 and some dollars was license for.
Right, so if you look at it, the 16 core packs is the same price relatively to the 2012 model. They're just breaking it down into cores. so
Presented
people that-
different
Yes,
core
so
versus-
as long as you're under 16 cores on your hosts, the pricing is no different.
Yeah, it's when you go over that core
It's
allotment.
when you're over 16 cores between the two sockets, that's where you may have to pay more because you bought a beefier machine. That doesn't count hyperthreading. We're talking about true cores. So if you have, so if in VMware it says hyperthreading yes, and then your 16 cores is really 32 cores, it's still 16. Yeah.
So in that case, we should buy 16 plus 8, make it up to 24. And then everything under, however many VMs I run, I'm not gonna buy license for it.
As long as it's data center.
As long as it's data center, yeah.
Remember, if
See,
it's
if it's
standard.
standard,
You
then
only get
can-
2 VMs per license on standard.
Right, in a single host environment. But if you have 2 hosts, It's 1-to-1, 1 VM per host. So that's the thing, it's worth calculating how many VMs you expect to have on these hosts and then doing the math. A good amount of times it makes sense to do data center anyways, especially if you're planning on growing and you're right at the cusp. You might as well.
There is some system that I gotta build some
Exactly.
systems next year. New
That's
project,
exactly it.
for the lessons and all.
20 total VMs?
Yeah, well, we could do the
That
math
was the
based on.
breakpoint. but
Is it
yeah,
20?
It was the breakpoint. I don't know what it's gonna be in.
20 VM, well, yeah. It depends also on how many hosts you have too.
It is 20.
It is.
Yeah. Sweet guess. Anyways, yeah, so if you have 24 VMs on each of your hosts, just license them all each with data center, and you're good for unlimited VMs.
And I'll also look at, I also say do future projection for about a year or two. And if you know you're gonna go over that, it's good just to set it up with data center at that point.
Today, and then you don't even have
Because
to
you're
worry
gonna
about
just start virtualizing and virtualizing and virtualizing. I say that because I've been doing licensing for about the last 13 years. And I've seen most of the changes that have gone through. When they started doing these virtualization allotments, I was working with clients that would start saying, okay, I just spun a bunch up more. They'd keep calling me and ordering more and
Yes.
more and more and more. And why don't you just do data center? And that was before they did step-ups. So, there are step-ups where if that's, again, a software assurance benefit. But if you have software assurance on your Windows servers, it's active. Let's say you have to make that jump to data center. They
you get the credit for the standard.
Yeah, it's the old product upgrade excuse.
So if they don't have SA and they bought 4 standards, they're losing and they're dumping that and buying data.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to put that in as a sunk cost and then, or a loss, and then when you do the math, you put that in as a loss to see when the break-even point really is.
Would make sense.
Say I have an environment with 2 physical hosts running 4 VMs. And I license that with 2016 with 2 16 packs, which would be fully licensed.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if I need to build a 5th VM? How many more packs do I need to purchase? Do I need to purchase a full 16? Or can I purchase
That's a
2
great
pack?
question. That is a great question. I don't know that one.
If it's Microsoft determining that, I'm going to say yes.
It's probably a full 16.
Yeah, but it's the same
Well,
thing.
actually, no, that makes perfect sense. It is 16 because the cost of 16 is what the one standard license
Yeah,
used to
you
cost.
would have to keep buying more servers, but then you would get 2 more instances with that
2
license.
instances with that one license.
Yeah.
That makes sense because it follows the same method as standard before.
Yeah, what's weird is everything that I've at least seen in my past of doing all of this is if somebody goes virtualized, they go all in. So they've got a lot of virtual instances and they keep building them and building them and building them. So data center usually makes sense, but it just depends on what your environment looks like and also what you own. I mean, if you own a ton right now, then what's it really going to be to you to be able to?
We had price difference with this standard.
Do you have it right there?
It's like 900.
I think we have MSRPs.
4,400. Something like that.
Yeah,
It was like 900 versus 4,400.
Yeah, it's a large difference. I think he might have the MSRPs right on here.
Yeah, it
There it
was
is.
882 and then 6,155.
Oh, it went up $6,000.
It's a lot.
Yeah, data center went up at least.
Did it? Okay. Well, it's probably because of the feature difference.
Yeah, so 6,200 versus 880.
880 is the single server.
Yeah.
Is the
Standard.
now?
880.
880 is, and these are also MSRP.
These are MSRP, so depending on the, depending on the
Agreements you have.
licensing
Pay
vehicle.
like 675, I think, to pay for standard somewhere there.
It depends on the licensing program, Aaron. I mean, these are the Microsoft's
Walk off the
MSRP,
street.
which is always
Yeah.
high. Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely an increase on data center.
But it makes sense because they're, again, putting higher features in it.
Yeah, they're trying to compete with VMware's, because they're competing with VMware's vSAN right out the door with Storage Spaces
S2D,
Direct,
yep.
which has a huge license cost right there. So with that, you're still winning by a long ways with data center, and if you make use of Storage Spaces Direct.
Your Cal standpoint, 2016, is there much of a price difference?
There's pricing on the CALs.
Yeah, there's not
Unless you
pricing
have
on
a
the
price
CALs
sheet.
right here.
It's,
Might have one for a customer.
for a version increase, yeah, there's usually a few bucks added on. But I haven't got it.
But it's not like data center where it's
No, it's not. They haven't jumped up
$30%.
or
Okay.
anything.
Yeah.
I won't know this.
At what point do
Look at the licenses, don't tell me.
usually we're deploy a new server operating system, full version to the 12, to the 8, to the 8, to the 12, to the 16. And what we're going to do, our question was, can we use 2016 as a Hyper-V server without VMs that are all 2012 or 2?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to defer that to one of my guys.
I got another one that's very similar to that is, well, I'm going to deploy a backup server that only runs backups, so no end users need to access the services of that server. And now that server is 2016, even though everything else is 2012 R2, do I need user cows for 2016? And his argument was, well, end users aren't accessing the services on that server.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't be required to buy cows.
Will they ever?
No, it's a backup server.
Just backups?
Now wait a second. So the admin goes and accesses that server.
So you need at least one.
I was just going to say, usually they require you to buy at least one cow, but
good to know.
And with that backup server, if everything else goes down and that's on backup, I take it you're not backing up your infrastructure, you're just backing up data, right?
Yeah, it's all data, and then you're restoring the VMs back to wherever they're at.
Can't they just include a cow?
Like just one, right?
I wish they would.
Yeah.
No, they'd ask for one cow, but it just depends on anybody who's going to access that server at all. And it's not a roving cow, it's
a named.
It's a named user, named device.
Who's actually licensed correctly with Microsoft?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah, my last job was, we actually paid Microsoft to audit us. We found out we had like 100 extra Visio licenses.
Yeah, I used to audit.
Well,
I used to
now-
actually do audits for CDW.
yeah. And now Microsoft actually funds those audits
Yeah.
because they want you to.
Well, especially if it's proactive. It
Yeah,
makes sense.
They want you to.
They'd spend, they'd fund 10 grand for those audits sometimes.
Yeah.
And there was one, it depends on the company. I have had never seen a completely correct licensing company. I have seen some that are completely over-licensed. But this again was
Microsoft is
7
happy
years
with
ago.
that.
Yeah.
7 years ago, they were over-licensed.
Did they get money back?
No. Well, to be honest, there is a way that I've seen do it, but it's not the way you'd think. They don't cut you a check. Services dollars. I have seen that when we moved a
Funding
client.
dollars.
Taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I moved a client to an enterprise agreement, and the Microsoft rep said, wow, they're over licensed in so many things, but they're going to buy everything now on enterprise and put the software assurance on it. So we're going to throw a bunch of services funding at them. Do like 10 grand of funding at them. But it means you're just going to consume their product, so they're happy.
Yeah. And you're with them for longer.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our cards are also in the mugs.
Yeah, thanks for the goodies. We do a little drawing here, the people that are remaining. You guys are now.
Oh, wait. No, yeah, wait.
I don't trust myself.
So this is for that admin book.
We have Nat Schmidt.
Oh, boy.
Mr. Nat.
So which
Learn how to read again.
Now you gotta read that.
Is it talk?
PDF not included.
It's not audible, sorry.
Thanks, guys.
Well, guys, thanks for coming out. We appreciate it. We have always have more people sign up than show up, but we have goals and we try to make sure we keep on top of these things and how we do it. We keep our team sharp by working on presentations like this. We had one last month, one before, and one before that. We'll have one next month.
Next month is Azure.
Azure is next month.
Azure DR is next month, and then SCCM will be the month after.
If you're interested in seeing how Azure can help you with PR capabilities, next month is our next session. Last month was
That's our wheelhouse right there.
the presentation.